My children didn't come for cake. They came for the keys to everything I ever built. I should have known something was wrong the moment they all showed up together. Sarah, Michael, and David. When was the last time those three were in the same room without someone dying or getting married? But there they were, standing in my kitchen like a firing squad, avoiding my eyes while David slid that official-looking binder across my counter. Just some paperwork, Mom, Sarah said, her voice too bright, too cheerful. Nothing urgent. Nothing urgent. 43 years I raised these children. 43 years of scraped knees and nightmare monsters. Of teaching them to drive stick shift and balance checkbooks. Of working 3 jobs to keep this ranch running when their father walked out. And this is how they talk to me now, like I'm some confused old woman who can't handle urgent things. I opened that binder and my blood turned to ice water. Right there on page 1, in cold legal language, upon signs of cognitive decline or incapacity, the undersigned agrees to vacate the main residence and transfer operational control. Cognitive decline. They actually put those words on paper. My own children, sitting in the kitchen I built, planning my exile like I was already dead. I kept reading, my hands shaking with something that wasn't fear. It was rage, pure, burning rage. They'd thought of everything, where I'd live, the old foreman's cabin behind the barn, what I'd get to keep, a monthly allowance from my own land. When I'd have to leave, immediately upon their determination of my diminished capacity, Michael cleared his throat. It's really for your own protection, Mom. We've been worried about you living out here alone. Protection? From what? From the land I'd worked for decades? From the home I'd defended through droughts and floods and bank foreclosures? From the life I'd built with my own bleeding hands? You've seemed confused lately, Sarah added, not meeting my eyes. Forgetting things. We just think it would be safer if you had some help managing everything. Confused. I wanted to laugh, but the sound that came out was closer to a growl. I've been managing this ranch since before they could tie their own shoes. I've negotiated with banks, fought off developers, handled everything from tax disputes to equipment failures. But I forget one appointment that I actually rescheduled, not forgot. And suddenly, I'm incompetent. I looked at their faces, really looked. Sarah with her nervous smile, playing with her wedding ring. Michael staring at his phone like it held the secrets of the universe. David drumming his fingers on my table, checking his watch. They weren't here because they were worried about me. They were here because they were worried about their inheritance. The realization hit me like a physical blow. All those recent visits, all the sudden interest in my affairs, all the gentle suggestions about updating my will, organizing my papers, making things easier for everyone. They hadn't been caring for me. They'd been circling me like vultures. How long? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. How long what? Mom? Sarah's voice was still too bright. How long have you been planning this? The silence stretched between us like a chasm. David shifted in his chair. Michael finally looked up from his phone. Sarah's smile finally cracked. It's not like that, she started. How long? Michael sighed like I was being difficult. Mom, we've been concerned for months. Ever since you called me at work confused about Dad's insurance paperwork. Your father's been dead for 15 years, Michael. I called you about my insurance paperwork. The forms were deliberately confusing, and I wanted a second opinion before I signed anything. That's not confusion. That's wisdom. But they'd already made up their minds. In their version of events, I was the doddering old mother who couldn't manage her own affairs. In their version, This intervention was mercy, not theft. I closed the binder and pushed it back across the table. The sound it made sliding across the wood was like a judge's gavel. No. Three faces stared at me in surprise. Mom, you should really think about this, David said carefully. We've already talked to some lawyers, and they think this arrangement would be best for everyone. Best for everyone. Code for, we've already spent your money in our heads. I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor like fingernails on a chalkboard. I didn't say another word. I just walked out of my own kitchen, leaving them sitting there with their paperwork and their plans and their complete underestimation of the woman who raised them. In the hallway, where they couldn't see me, I pressed my back against the wall and whispered to the house that had sheltered us all. If they want a war, they need to remember who trained them to survive one. They think they know me. Sarah, Michael, David. They think they know exactly who their mother is. The woman who packed their lunches and bandaged their cuts and drove them to soccer practice in a pickup truck, held together with duct tape and determination. But that's not all I am. That was never all I was. What my children don't remember, or maybe never really understood, is that before I was their mother, I was Maria Santos, logistics coordinator for the Federal Emergency Management Agency. For 12 years before I met their father, before I traded my career for love and motherhood, I ran disaster response operations across 3 states. Hurricane Andrew? I was there, coordinating supply chains and evacuation routes. The 93 floods in Missouri, I ran the emergency shelter program. The California wildfires in 91, I managed resource allocation for 16 refugee camps. I didn't handle paperwork from behind a desk. I worked in the field, in the chaos, where one wrong decision could mean people died. I learned to think 10 steps ahead while exhausted, to spot lies and manipulation from desperate people, to coordinate complex operations with multiple moving parts. When that tornado hit our county in '98 and the kids were small, who do you think organized the neighborhood response? When the bank tried to foreclose on the ranch in 2003, who negotiated the restructured payment plan? When the state wanted to run a highway through our property in 2010, who fought them for 3 years and won? But my children remember none of that. They remember the woman who made pancakes and helped with homework. They forgot that she was also the woman who stared down bureaucrats and read legal documents for fun and never, ever backed down from a fight when her family was threatened. They especially forgot that last part. After they left with their rejected paperwork, I sat in my kitchen for a long time, thinking. In disaster response, you learn that the first emergency is never the real emergency. There's always something bigger coming, something you haven't seen yet. So I started looking. I went through every conversation I'd had with each of my children over the past 6 months, replaying them in my mind like evidence tapes, and patterns started to emerge. Ugly patterns. Sarah's sudden interest in updating my paperwork back in March, how she'd insisted on coming with me to the bank, how she'd asked so many questions about account access, how she'd suggested I add her name just for convenience. Michael's visit in April, when he'd spent 3 hours photographing family documents for genealogy research, how he'd been particularly interested in property deeds and insurance policies, how he'd offered to digitize everything for me. David's recent obsession with my estate planning, how he'd brought up my will at least 6 times in the past 2 months, how he'd suggested I talk to his lawyer friend about modernizing my assets. 3 children, 3 different approaches, 1 coordinated strategy. They'd been working together, planning this for months, maybe longer. The thought made me sick to my stomach, but it also made me furious. And fury, I've learned, is much more useful than heartbreak. I went to my office. the same office where I used to coordinate disaster relief, where I'd learned to organize chaos into action plans. I pulled out every document related to the ranch: deeds, surveys, tax records, insurance policies, mineral rights agreements, everything. I spread it all across my desk and started reading like my life depended on it. Because it did. That's when I found the interesting paperwork. Tucked inside the original property deed from 1924, yellowed and nearly forgotten, was a land designation I'd never paid attention to before. A reference to something called the Chisholm Trail Historical Corridor Protection Act. I'd never heard of it, but I had a feeling it was about to become very important. At 6 o'clock the next morning, I called Jim Patterson. Jim had been my supervisor at FEMA for 8 of my 12 years. After he retired, he'd started his own emergency planning consulting firm, working with cities and counties on disaster preparedness. We'd stayed in touch over the years, mostly Christmas cards, and the occasional phone call when one of us needed to vent about bureaucratic stupidity. Maria? His voice was gravelly with sleep. Jesus, what time is it? Jim, I need help. Not the kind you're thinking of. I need the kind of help I used to give other people. I told him everything: the ambush, the paperwork, the months of coordinated manipulation. When I finished, there was a long silence. Then, those little shits. Jim, no, I'm serious. Those little shits. After everything you've done, everything you sacrificed for them, they try to pull this? I could hear him getting out of bed, could picture him already planning. Maria, listen to me. You taught half the disaster response coordinators in this state. You've got friends you don't even remember. We're going to bury these kids in paperwork so thick they'll need excavation equipment to find their way out. I don't want to bury them, Jim. I just want them to remember who raised them. Same difference. I'm driving up there today. Don't sign anything. Don't agree to anything. Don't even talk to them until I get there. And start making a list of every legal document they've seen in the past year, every conversation about money or property or your health, everything. Jim, you don't have to. Maria, you once coordinated relief efforts for 30,000 displaced people during a hurricane while running on 3 hours of sleep and a diet of vending machine coffee. You think I'm going to let your spoiled kids push you around? Think again. He hung up, and for the first time since my children had walked into my kitchen, I smiled. A real smile. By noon, Jim was sitting at my kitchen table with a legal pad, a laptop, and an expression like a military strategist planning an invasion. Okay, he said, here's what we're dealing with. Your kids have been building a case that you're mentally incompetent. They're going to claim you're confused, forgetful, unable to manage your own affairs. They'll probably get some doctor to say you're showing signs of dementia or cognitive decline. My stomach clenched. Can they do that? They can try, but here's what they don't know. You've got documentation, bank records showing sound financial decisions, property management records showing responsible oversight, tax records showing everything filed correctly and on time, medical records showing no cognitive issues. He looked up at me. You do have recent medical records, right? Physical last month, blood work, cognitive screening, the works. Dr. Kim said I'm healthier than most women half my age. Perfect. They're building their case on assumptions and wishful thinking. We're building ours on facts. He flipped to a new page. Now, tell me about this historical corridor thing you found. I showed him the old paperwork, the reference to the Chisholm Trail designation. His eyes lit up like Christmas morning. Maria, do you know what this means? That I've been paying property taxes on historical land for 30 years without knowing it? It means your property has federal protection. They can't just transfer ownership. can't sell it to developers, can't even make significant changes without federal review. If this designation is still active, your kid's little plan just hit a brick wall. He was already on his phone, calling people I'd never heard of, using terms I barely understood: land historians, state legal advisors, federal property specialists. By evening, my kitchen looked like a disaster response command center. Exactly the way I liked it. "We're going to need more people," Jim said, reviewing his notes. "I've got a friend who retired from the state attorney general's office. She specializes in elder law and she hates bullies. And there's this federal land historian who owes me a favor from the Missouri floods. If anyone can track down the status of this Chisholm Trail designation, it's her." "Jim, this is starting to sound expensive." "Maria." He looked at me seriously. "How much is your life worth? How much is your dignity worth? How much is it worth to make sure your kids learn that they can't just decide their mother is disposable?" I thought about that binder on my counter, about the casual way they'd discussed my exile, about the months of lies and manipulation. "Whatever it costs," I said. By the end of the week, my dining room looked like a legal war room. Jim had brought in his cavalry, and they were magnificent. Dr. Patricia Patty Kim, not my doctor, but a different Dr. Kim, who'd retired as chief legal counsel for the state attorney general. She'd spent 30 years fighting cases involving elder abuse, financial exploitation, and family manipulation. She was tiny, probably 70 years old, and when she smiled, you got the feeling she was already planning how to destroy your entire life. Then there was Rebecca Martinez, the federal land historian Jim had mentioned. She'd arrived with boxes of documents and a laptop loaded with property databases going back to territorial days. If there was a historical designation on my land, she'd find it. "This is fascinating," Rebecca said, spreading maps across my table. The Chisholm Trail designation was part of a Federal Protection Act passed in 1978, but it was based on trail routes established in the 1860s. A lot of property owners don't even know they're protected because the original surveys were done with such broad language. "Protected how?" I asked. Patty looked up from her legal books. "If your property is designated as part of a historical corridor, it means any transfer of ownership has to go through federal review. Any development or significant changes require environmental and historical impact studies. It's designed to prevent exactly what your children are trying to do: force you off historically significant land. But I've lived here for 30 years. How would I not know about something like that?" Rebecca laughed. "You'd be surprised. The federal government isn't exactly known for clear communication with property owners. Plus, the designation might not have mattered until now. If you've been living here peacefully, maintaining the property appropriately, there would have been no reason for anyone to mention it." Jim was on his phone again, talking to someone about property records and federal databases. When he hung up, he was grinning. "Good news and better news," he said. "Good news is Rebecca's research checks out. Your property is definitely within the protected corridor. Better news is your kid's lawyer never checked for federal designations." "How do you know that?" "Because I called him." Jim's grin widened. "I told him I was considering buying property in the area and wanted to know about any federal restrictions. He had no idea what I was talking about." Patty cackled, actually cackled. "Oh, this is going to be fun. They came to this fight with cap guns, and Maria's got nuclear weapons." I felt something I hadn't felt since this whole nightmare started. Hope. Not just hope that I could fight my children's plan, but hope that I could win, decisively. "So, what's our next move?" I asked. "Three-pronged attack," Patty said, consulting her notes. First, we file the historical protection paperwork with the Federal Register, making the corridor designation official and public. Second, we document every instance of your children's manipulation and pressure tactics, build a case for financial elder abuse. Third, we go public. Public? Community support, Jim explained. Your children are counting on this staying private, on you being too embarrassed or confused to fight back. But if the community knows what's happening, if they see your kids trying to steal their mother's land, the social pressure alone might end this. I thought about my neighbors, about the people I'd helped during emergencies, about the community I'd been part of for 3 decades. Would they support me? Or would they believe my children's version of events, that I was just a confused old woman who needed managing? There's only one way to find out, I said. Rebecca worked for 3 straight days, cross-referencing property records with federal databases, historical survey maps with modern GPS coordinates. On Thursday evening, she called us all into the dining room with the expression of someone who just struck gold. "Sit down," she said, "all of you." She spread a large map across the table, marked with colored lines and dated annotations. "This," she said, pointing to a thick red line running right through my property, "is the original Chisholm Trail route as surveyed in 1867. This," she pointed to a blue line, "is the approximate route as understood when the Federal Protection Act was passed in 1978. And this," she pointed to a green line that encompassed both previous lines plus a significant buffer zone, "is the actual protected corridor as defined by the federal legislation." I stared at the map. The green line covered not just my house and barns, but the entire ranch, including the mineral rights and the creek that ran through the back pasture. "What does that mean?" I asked. Patty was already grinning. "It means your property isn't just protected, it's locked down tight. No forced transfers, no private sales without federal review. No changes in ownership or usage without environmental impact studies. But my children don't know this? Nobody knows this," Rebecca said. "The original designation was filed with the Department of Interior, but there was no requirement to notify property owners. Most of the protected properties have changed hands multiple times since 1978, and the designation just got lost in the paperwork." Jim was practically bouncing in his chair. "Maria, do you understand what this means? Your kids can threaten you all they want, but they cannot legally force you off this land. Even if they somehow convinced a court that you were incompetent, they couldn't sell it or develop it or do anything with it without federal approval, which they would never get." "And federal approval takes how long?" I asked. "Years," Patty said. "Minimum 2 years, probably closer to 5. Environmental reviews, historical impact studies, tribal consultation. It's a bureaucratic nightmare." I felt a laugh building in my chest, starting low and growing until I couldn't contain it anymore. I laughed until tears ran down my face, until my sides hurt, until Jim started laughing with me. "They have no idea," I gasped. "They have absolutely no idea what they're walking into." "No," Patty agreed, wiping her own eyes. "But they're about to find out." The monthly county commissioner meeting was usually a sleepy affair. Road maintenance budgets and zoning requests that affected maybe a dozen people. But word had gotten out that I was planning to speak, and the community center was packed. I saw neighbors I hadn't talked to in months, people from church, other ranch families, even some of the kids I'd helped during the tornado 15 years ago, now grown with children of their own. At the back of the room, I spotted Sarah and Michael, their faces pale and confused. When my name was called, I walked to the podium with a folder full of documents and 30 years of community credibility. My name is Maria Santos, I began, my voice clear and strong. Most of you know me. You know I've lived on the old Richardson Ranch for 30 years, that I helped coordinate disaster relief after the tornado, that I served on the school board for 6 years. Nods around the room. These people did know me. What you might not know is that 3 of my children recently presented me with legal documents demanding that I sign over my property and move into the back cabin because they believe I'm no longer capable of managing my own affairs. A murmur went through the crowd. I saw Mrs. Peterson from the church shake her head in disgust. Tom Walker, whose barn I'd helped rebuild after the tornado, was frowning at my children. They've spent months documenting what they call my confusion and forgetfulness. They've consulted lawyers and prepared paperwork and planned my future without ever once asking what I wanted. I opened my folder and pulled out Dr. Kim's medical report. According to my doctor, I'm in excellent health both physically and mentally. According to my bank, I've made no financial errors or poor decisions. According to my property management records, I've maintained this ranch better than most people half my age. More murmurs, these ones angry. I could see my children shrinking in their seats. But the most interesting thing I discovered is that my property is protected under the Federal Chisholm Trail Historical Corridor Act, which means that even if my children somehow convinced a court that I was incompetent, they couldn't sell my land, couldn't develop it, couldn't do anything with it without federal approval that would take years to obtain. The murmur turned into actual conversation. People were talking to each other, pointing at my children, shaking their heads. I'm not here asking for your sympathy, I continued. I'm here because I want you to know that when someone tries to steal your life, your dignity, your right to determine your own future, you don't have to take it quietly. You don't have to be grateful for their concern. You can fight back. I look directly at my children, and sometimes the people who taught you how to fight are the ones who fight the hardest. The applause started slowly, then built until the entire room was on its feet. Mrs. Peterson was crying. Tom Walker was nodding like I just declared war on something that needed fighting. And my children? They were gone. They'd slipped out the back while I was speaking, leaving behind a room full of people who would remember this moment for a very long time. The next morning, my phone started ringing at 6 a.m. Mom, what the hell was that? Sarah's voice was shrill with panic. Why would you embarrass us like that? In front of the whole community? I told the truth. Your version of the truth? You made us sound like monsters. I described your actions, Sarah. If they sound monstrous, maybe you should examine your actions. She hung up on me. 20 minutes later, Michael called. Mom, people at work are asking about you. Someone posted a video of your speech on Facebook. This is humiliating. Good. Maybe humiliation will teach you something that love apparently couldn't. We were trying to help you. You were trying to control me. There's a difference. He hung up too. By noon, David had left a voicemail, not even brave enough to talk to me directly. Mom, I don't know what you think you're accomplishing, but you're destroying our family. We love you, and we're worried about you. And somehow, you've turned that into something ugly. I hope you're proud of yourself. I was. I was proud of myself for the first time in months. But they weren't done fighting. They were just getting started. The first sign of their retaliation came that evening, when Mrs. Peterson called to tell me that someone had filed an anonymous complaint with the county about unsanitary conditions on my property. Animal control would be coming out to investigate. The second sign came when my neighbor, Bob Martinez, stopped by to warn me that someone had been asking questions about my mental state and whether I'd been acting strange lately. The third sign was the attempted breach of my bank account. My computer security system, the same one I'd used to protect federal emergency databases, sent me an alert that someone had tried to access my checking account with an incorrect password. 7 times. I called Jim. They're scared, he said after I told him everything. Scared people make mistakes. Keep documenting everything. The anonymous complaints, the attempts to access your accounts, the questions they're asking around town. We're building a case for harassment and attempted financial exploitation. Jim, I'm tired of fighting my own children. I know Maria, but they started this fight, and they're escalating it. The only way it ends is if you finish it. He was right. They'd drawn first blood, and they weren't planning to stop until they got what they wanted. But they'd forgotten something important. I didn't just know how to fight. I knew how to win. Friday morning, I put on my best dress, the one I'd worn to Sarah's wedding, and drove to the county courthouse. I had an appointment with the clerk of courts, a stack of legal documents, and a plan that would end this war once and for all. The historical protection paperwork went in first, making the federal corridor designation official and public record. Anyone who ran a property search on my ranch would now see the federal protection status. No surprises, no hidden loopholes. Next came the legal freeze on all ranch-associated assets. Patty had been thorough. Every bank account, every piece of equipment, every mineral right was now locked down pending resolution of the family dispute. My children couldn't touch anything without court approval. Finally, the cease and desist notices, legal documents informing Sarah, Michael, and David that any further attempts to access my financial accounts, make decisions about my property, or harass me or my neighbors would result in criminal charges for elder abuse and attempted fraud. The clerk stamped each document with the kind of satisfaction usually reserved for Christmas morning. Mrs. Santos, she said, I've been waiting 30 years for someone to stand up to their kids this way. Good for you. From the courthouse, I drove to the sheriff's department, where I filed formal complaints about the attempted bank access and the anonymous harassment complaints. Sheriff Williams, who'd worked with me during 3 different emergency responses, took my statement personally. Maria, he said after I explained everything, I want you to know that if your children or anyone else tries to intimidate you or force you off your property, you call me immediately. This is elder abuse, plain and simple, and we don't tolerate it in this county. By afternoon, the cease and desist notices had been served. My children now had legal documentation that their little campaign of pressure and manipulation was over. But I wasn't done yet. I had one more card to play, and it was going to be decisive. I sent the text messages that evening. Family meeting tomorrow, 2 p.m., the old conference room at the community center. Come alone. They came, of course. They had to. Their entire plan was falling apart, and they needed to know how much I knew, how much I could prove, how much trouble they were in. I arrived early and set up the room like the emergency briefings I used to run. Projector, screen, documents organized by topic, water bottles and notepads at each seat. When Sarah, Michael, and David walked in, they found me standing at the front of the room like the disaster coordinator I'd once been. Sit down, I said. It wasn't a request. They sat. I clicked the projector remote, and the first slide appeared on the screen. Property Protection Documentation, Federal Chisholm Trail Historical Corridor Status. Let's start with what you don't know, I said. My property is protected under federal law. Has been since 1978. You cannot sell it, cannot develop it, cannot transfer ownership without federal approval that takes a minimum of 2 years and requires environmental impact studies. Click. The next slide showed bank account access logs. Michael, You tried to access my checking account 7 times last Tuesday evening. I have the IP address, the attempted passwords, and the security footage from your office building showing you working late that night. Michael's face went white. Click. The next slide was a timeline of their coordinated visits and requests. Sarah, you suggested I add your name to my bank accounts in March. You photographed my financial documents in April. You recommended your lawyer friend in May. David, you brought up my will 6 times between June and August. You offered to help with my estate planning 9 times. I could see them shrinking in their chairs, beginning to understand how thoroughly I documented their campaign. Click. The next slide showed the anonymous complaint forms filed against me. Someone filed complaints about unsanitary conditions on my property. The complaint forms were submitted online from David's home IP address. Animal control found no violations, by the way. David was staring at his hands now. Click. The final slide was a single line of text. Legal actions taken. I've filed historical protection papers with the federal government. I've placed a legal freeze on all ranch assets. I've served cease and desist orders on all 3 of you. I've filed criminal complaints for attempted financial exploitation and harassment. The room was silent except for the hum of the projector. Here's what's going to happen now, I continued. You're going to stop treating me like a confused old woman who can't manage her own affairs. You're going to stop coordinating attacks on my competence and my character. You're going to stop trying to access my accounts or influence my neighbors or file anonymous complaints. I turned off the projector and faced them directly. Most importantly, you're going to remember that I am not your victim. I am your mother. I raised you to be strong, independent people who could survive anything life threw at them. But I didn't raise you to be thieves. Sarah was crying now, but I wasn't finished. You didn't lose a ranch today. You lost access to the woman who built it. You lost the right to family Sunday dinners and holiday celebrations and birthday calls. You lost the privilege of calling yourselves my children until you remember how to act like family instead of vultures. I packed up my documents while they sat in stunned silence. When you're ready to apologize, really apologize, not the fake apologies you give when you want something, you know where to find me. Until then, stay off my property and out of my life. I walked out of that room with my head high and my conscience clear. Behind me, I could hear Sarah sobbing and David trying to speak, but I didn't look back. I was done being their victim. I was done being their target. I was done being anything other than exactly who I'd always been. A strong woman who didn't back down from fights, especially when her entire life was at stake. The fallout was swift and public. Small towns have their own form of justice, and mine rallied around me like I was under siege from foreign invaders. Sarah's real estate office started losing clients when word got out about what she'd tried to do to her own mother. People don't want to do business with someone who would steal from family. Michael's construction company lost the contract for the new school addition because the school board, half of whom had worked with me during emergencies, didn't trust his character anymore. David, who worked for the state highway department, found himself under review for ethics violations after his supervisor heard about the attempted financial exploitation of his mother. I should have felt satisfied. Instead, I mostly felt sad. These were my children, the babies I'd rocked to sleep, the toddlers I'd taught to walk, the teenagers I'd guided through heartbreak and disappointment. Somewhere along the way, they'd forgotten that family loyalty runs both ways, but consequences have a way of clarifying people's thinking. Within 2 weeks, Sarah called. "Mom," she said, her voice small and shaky, "I need to talk to you." I'm listening. Not over the phone. Can I come see you? I almost said no, almost hung up on her, the way she'd hung up on me so many times over the past month. But something in her voice, maybe genuine regret, maybe just desperation, made me pause. Come alone, I said. And Sarah, don't bring any paperwork. Sarah came that evening, driving up the long gravel driveway like she was approaching a house of judgment, which I suppose she was. She sat in my kitchen, the same kitchen where this whole nightmare had started, and cried for 20 minutes before she could speak. Mom, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. We were wrong. I was wrong. We were scared and stupid and wrong. I didn't respond immediately. In disaster coordination, you learn to let people talk until they've said everything they need to say. Interrupting just makes them defensive. We thought, God, this sounds awful now, but we thought you were getting old and confused, and we thought if we didn't do something, you'd make bad decisions and lose everything. We thought we were protecting you. From what? From yourself, from scammers, from making mistakes. She wiped her eyes with a tissue from the box I'd placed between us. We thought because you forgot that one doctor's appointment, because you sometimes repeat stories, because you ask for help reading those deliberately confusing insurance forms, that you were declining. Did you ever consider talking to me about your concerns? We tried. Remember when Michael brought up that retirement community brochure? When David suggested you might want to downsize? When I offered to help with your finances? Those weren't conversations, Sarah. Those were manipulation attempts. Talking to me would have been, Mom, we're worried about you living alone. How do you feel about your ability to manage the ranch? What would you like us to do to help? She was quiet for a long time, processing the difference between concern and control. We messed up, she finally said. We messed up really badly. And now everyone in town thinks we're terrible people, and we probably deserve it. Do you think you're terrible people? I think we did terrible things. I think we forgot who you are. Not just our mom, but Maria Santos, the woman who coordinates disaster relief and fought off bank foreclosures and raised 3 kids alone while running a ranch. That was closer to an actual apology than I'd expected. Sarah, I need you to understand something. Your actions over the past few months weren't mistakes or miscommunications. They were betrayal. You coordinated with your brothers to build a case for my incompetence. You tried to manipulate me into signing away my rights. You filed false complaints when I fought back. I know. Do you? Do you really understand what you tried to take from me? She nodded, still crying. Everything. We tried to take your home, your independence, your right to make your own decisions. We tried to make you helpless. And what's the only thing worse than being helpless? She looked at me with confusion. Being made helpless by the people you love most. That broke her completely. She sobbed until she had no tears left, until she was just making small wounded sounds like a hurt animal. When she finally stopped, she looked at me with red, swollen eyes. How do we fix this, Mom? How do we make this right? You start by understanding that this isn't something you can fix quickly. Trust, once broken this badly, takes time to rebuild. You betrayed me in the deepest way possible. You tried to convince me I was losing my mind so you could steal my life. That's not something I can just forgive and forget. But you'll try? To forgive us, I mean. I looked at my daughter, really looked at her. She was 42 years old, successful in her career, mother to 2 children I adored. She was also someone who had just spent months plotting to steal from her own mother. I love you, Sarah. I will always love you. But love and trust are different things. You and your brothers destroyed my trust. If you want it back, you're going to have to earn it. How? By proving over time that you remember who I am. Not just your mother, but a capable, intelligent woman who has been making good decisions longer than you've been alive. By treating me with the respect you'd show any other adult. By never ever trying to manage my life again. She nodded frantically. Yes, okay, I can do that. We'll see. She left that night with a fragile hope that maybe, eventually, we could find our way back to being mother and daughter. I wasn't ready to promise anything more than that. Over the following months, something remarkable happened. The community center where I'd made my speech became an informal meeting place for other older adults who'd been dealing with similar pressure from their families. Mrs. Peterson told me her son had been trying to convince her to sell her house and move into assisted living, even though she was perfectly capable of living independently. Tom Walker's daughter had been helping with his finances by gradually taking over all his accounts. Martha Stewart, not the famous one, our local Martha Stewart, had been pressured by her children to sign over power of attorney just in case something happened. They started coming to me for advice. These neighbors who'd heard my story and realized they weren't alone in their struggles with well-meaning but controlling adult children. It's like they think hitting 65 makes you automatically incompetent, Mrs. Peterson said during one of our kitchen table conversations. Like all your years of experience just evaporate on your birthday. They're scared, I explained. They see us aging and they panic. They think they need to protect us from everything, including ourselves. But protection becomes control, and control becomes abuse, and they don't even realize they're doing it. So, what do? We document everything. We stay mentally and physically active. We maintain our independence fiercely, and we fight back when necessary. Word spread. Soon I was getting phone calls from adult children who'd heard about my situation and wanted advice on how to help their parents without taking over their lives. I started referring them to resources on respectful caregiving, on having honest conversations about aging concerns, on the difference between support and control. Jim laughed when I told him about my unofficial consulting practice. Maria, you've accidentally become an expert on elder empowerment. Is that a real thing? It is now. The irony wasn't lost on me. My children's attempt to make me helpless had instead made me more powerful than I'd ever been. I was helping other people fight for their independence, sharing the skills I'd learned in disaster coordination to help them organize their resistance to family manipulation. I was doing exactly what I'd always done, helping people survive emergencies. The only difference was that now, the emergency was their own families. Michael came to see me on a Tuesday evening in late fall, almost 4 months after our confrontation at the community center. Unlike Sarah's emotional breakdown, he approached our conversation like a business negotiation, which I suppose it was. Mom, I've been thinking about what you said, about trust and respect, and treating you like the capable adult you are. And? And I realized I don't actually know how to do that. I've been treating you like a responsibility for so long, I forgot how to treat you like a person. That was more self-awareness than I'd expected from Michael, who'd always been the most stubborn of my 3 children. I lost the school construction contract, he continued. Probably lost 3 others too because of what we did. My reputation is basically shot. I'm sorry to hear that. Are you really? Or do you think I deserved it? I considered the question seriously. I think consequences are natural results of actions. You chose to try to steal from your mother. The community chose to respond appropriately. He winced. Fair enough. But Mom, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me, okay? Were you actually having problems? Memory issues, confusion, anything like that? Because if you were, and we just handled it badly, that's different than if we imagined the whole thing. Another moment of unexpected honesty. I appreciated that he was willing to ask the hard question. I had one missed doctor's appointment that I actually rescheduled, not forgot. I occasionally ask for help understanding deliberately confusing legal or insurance documents, which is wisdom, not confusion. I sometimes repeat stories, the way every person over 60 does sometimes. That's it. That's it. You and your siblings turned normal aging behaviors into evidence of incompetence because it served your purposes. He sat quietly for a long time, processing that truth. We really screwed up, didn't we? Yes. Is there any way to fix it? Between us? Maybe? In the community? That's going to take years of proving you're better than your worst decisions. What about the ranch? The inheritance stuff? We obviously can't force you to do anything, but what happens to all this when you're really gone? I'd been expecting that question for months. Michael, I'm 68 years old and in excellent health. I'll probably live another 20 years, maybe 30. By the time I'm actually ready to make decisions about the ranch's future, you and your siblings will be approaching your own retirement. So, you haven't decided anything? I've decided that inheritance is something you earn through relationship, not something you're owed because of biology. The people who love me, support me, and treat me with respect will inherit my love, my stories, and yes, my property. The people who see me as an obstacle to be managed will inherit exactly what they've invested in our relationship. Nothing. Nothing. He left that night with a lot to think about. Unlike Sarah, he didn't ask for immediate forgiveness or a quick path back into my good graces. He just said he'd like to try to rebuild our relationship if I was willing. I told him I'd think about it. David never came to apologize. Not that fall, not that winter, not the following spring. According to Sarah, who'd slowly been earning her way back into limited contact with me, David had convinced himself that I'd overreacted to their reasonable concerns about my obvious decline. He keeps saying you embarrassed the family for no reason, Sarah told me during one of our carefully structured monthly visits. He thinks you should apologize to us. I laughed, actually laughed out loud at that. David thinks I should apologize for fighting back when you three tried to steal my life? That's what he says. He says we were just trying to help, and you made us look like monsters. Sarah, you were monsters. Maybe not intentionally, maybe not maliciously, but you behaved monstrously toward me for months. I know that now, but David doesn't. No, and I don't think he's going to. He's dug himself in so deep with this narrative that we were the victims and you were the crazy old lady that he can't back down without admitting he was completely wrong. Then he doesn't back down, but he's your son. He's a grown man who chose to try to exploit his mother rather than love her. Being my son doesn't give him the right to abuse me, and it doesn't obligate me to tolerate abuse. David's refusal to acknowledge his wrongdoing became the final test of my resolve. It would have been easy to let him back in, to pretend his participation in the plot against me didn't matter as much since Sarah and Michael had apologized. But I couldn't do that without betraying everything I'd fought for. My children had learned that they could manipulate and pressure me without consequences for decades. Sarah's and Michael's apologies, however sincere, were prompted by social and professional consequences they couldn't ignore. If I forgave David without a real acknowledgement of wrongdoing, I'd be teaching all three of them that eventually I'd always give in. So David stayed on the outside, bitter and unrepentant, while his siblings slowly rebuilt their relationships with me. It broke my heart, but sometimes love requires you to let people experience the consequences of their choices, even when those people are your own children. The surprise visitor came on a Saturday morning in late spring, almost a year after the confrontation. I was working in my garden when a car pulled up the driveway, and Emma, David's youngest daughter, 19 years old and home from college, got out. I hadn't seen Emma since the previous Christmas, before everything fell apart with her father. She approached me carefully, like someone approaching a wild animal. "Grandma Maria? Hello, sweetheart. Can we talk? Please." We sat on my back porch, looking out over the pasture where I'd taught her to ride horses when she was 10 years old. "I heard about what happened," she said, "with Dad and Aunt Sarah and Uncle Michael, the whole thing. What did you hear?" "Dad's version first, that you were getting confused and forgetful, and they tried to help, and you freaked out and humiliated them publicly." "And what did you think of that version?" Emma smiled ruefully. "I thought it was bullshit, honestly." "Sorry, Grandma. I know you don't like that language. In this case, it's accurate." Then I heard the real story from some friends whose parents were at that community meeting, and I read the legal documents. Dad left copies lying around the house, probably hoping Mom would take his side. And what do you think of the real story? "I think my father and aunt and uncle are assholes who tried to steal from their own mother. And when you fought back, they couldn't handle being exposed as the bad guys they'd become." Emma had always been direct. It was one of the things I loved about her. "I'm sorry, Grandma. I'm sorry they did that to you. And I'm sorry I didn't know soon enough to stop them." "You couldn't have stopped them, sweetheart. They'd been planning this for months. But I could have warned you. I could have chosen your side instead of staying neutral. You were away at school. This wasn't your fight. It became my fight when they attacked my grandmother." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the horses graze in the afternoon sun. "Can I ask you something?" Emma said finally. "Of course. Are you going to forgive them? Dad and the others?" I thought about how to answer that. Emma was old enough for the truth, but young enough that the truth might hurt. I've forgiven Sarah and Michael in the sense that I'm not carrying anger toward them anymore. They apologized. They've changed their behavior, and we're slowly rebuilding our relationship. And Dad? Your father has made it clear that he believes he did nothing wrong. He thinks I owe him an apology for fighting back against his attempt to control me. I can't have a relationship with someone who refuses to acknowledge that they hurt me. Emma nodded slowly. He's stubborn. He's proud. There's a difference. Stubborn people eventually see reason. Proud people often can't afford to. Will you ever give up on him? Emma, I didn't give up on your father. He gave up on me when he decided I was too inconvenient to love. She started crying then, not the dramatic sobbing Sarah had done, but quiet tears for the father she was finally seeing clearly. "I don't want to choose between you and him." "You don't have to choose. You can love us both while acknowledging that we can't be in the same room right now. But family is supposed to stick together. Real family does stick together. Real family doesn't try to steal from each other. Real family fights for each other, not against each other." Emma stayed for dinner that night, and we talked about college, about her plans for the future, about everything except her father's refusal to make peace with me. When she left, she hugged me tightly. "I love you, Grandma, and I'm proud of you for fighting back." "I love you too, sweetheart." After she drove away, I sat on my porch until the stars came out, thinking about legacy and family and the courage required to love people who might not love you back. Emma would remember this time differently than her father would. She'd remember that her grandmother was strong enough to fight for herself, brave enough to stand up to her own children when they tried to steal her life. That was the legacy I wanted to leave, not just property and money, but the example of a woman who refused to be made helpless by anyone, even the people she loved most. 2 years later, my life had settled into something I'd never expected but found deeply satisfying. Sarah and Michael had both earned their way back into regular contact through consistent respect and genuine change in how they treated me. We had dinner twice a month. They called to chat rather than to manage me, and they'd learned to ask for my advice instead of assuming I needed theirs. David remained estranged, bitter and convinced that he was the wronged party. Occasionally, I heard through Sarah that he was still telling people I'd lost my mind and turned against my family for no reason. The community had long since made up its mind about who was telling the truth, but David clung to his version of events like a life raft. Emma visited regularly, and through her, I maintained a relationship with David's wife and older son, who'd gradually figured out that their father's story didn't match the evidence. It was heartbreaking and healing in equal measure. Heartbreaking because I'd lost a son. Healing because I'd gained the certainty that some relationships could survive testing. My informal consulting work with other families dealing with similar issues had grown into something more organized. Jim and I had started a nonprofit organization focused on elder empowerment and family communication. We ran workshops on respectful caregiving, helped families navigate difficult conversations about aging, and provided legal resources for older adults facing family manipulation. The ranch itself had become something of a symbol in our community. The federal historical designation that had saved my independence was now a source of pride for the county, bringing in history buffs and trail riders who pumped money into the local economy. What my children had seen as an inconvenient obstacle to their plans had become a community asset. But the most important change was internal. I'd rediscovered the woman I'd been before I became a mother, before I defined myself primarily through my relationships to other people. I was Maria Santos again, not just someone's mother or grandmother, but a complete person with her own interests, goals, and unshakable sense of self-worth. On an evening in late summer, almost 3 years after this whole ordeal began, I sat on my back porch watching the sun set over the pasture. The horses were grazing peacefully, the cicadas were singing their ancient songs, and the sky was painted in shades of pink and gold that no camera could capture. Sarah's car came up the driveway, and she joined me on the porch with 2 glasses of iced tea. We sat in comfortable silence, watching the day end. "Mom," she said finally, "can I ask you something I've been wondering about?" "Always. Do you ever regret fighting back? I mean, it caused so much upheaval, so much pain for everyone. Do you ever wish you'd just gone along with our plan?" I thought about that question, really thought about it. What would my life look like if I'd signed those papers, moved into the back cabin, accepted my children's definition of me as a confused old woman who needed managing? Sarah, what do you think would have happened if I'd given in? We would have taken care of you, made sure you were safe and comfortable. But would I have been me? She was quiet for a long time, considering. Probably not. You would have been the person we needed you to be instead of the person you are. And what kind of life is that? Not much of one. So, no, I don't regret fighting back. I regret that fighting was necessary. I regret that my own children couldn't see my strength, only my age. I regret that it took humiliating you publicly before you understood that I deserved respect. I regret that too. but I don't regret refusing to disappear quietly just because it would have been easier for everyone else. The sun finished its descent behind the hills, and the first stars began to appear. Soon the night sounds would start, owls and coyotes, and all the creatures that owned the darkness. You know what the best part is? I said. What? I'm not done yet. I'm 69 years old, in excellent health, and I have plans. I'm going to see those cabins built for women who need a safe place to start over. I'm going to expand the nonprofit work. I'm going to travel to places I've always wanted to see. I'm going to live every day I have left on my own terms. And if you really do start having health problems someday, if you really do need help managing things, then I'll ask for help from people who've proven they can support me without trying to control me, from people who remember that needing assistance doesn't mean losing autonomy. Sarah squeezed my hand. I'll remember that. I know you will. You've learned the difference between helping someone and managing them. That's not an easy lesson to learn. As the darkness settled around us, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, complete peace with my choices. I'd fought for my life and won it back. I'd lost some relationships, but saved others. I discovered that I was stronger at 69 than I'd been at 49, because strength isn't about physical power. It's about knowing who you are and refusing to let anyone else define you. My children had thought they were taking my life from me. Instead, they'd reminded me that I still had one to live, and I intended to live every minute of it as exactly who I was. Maria Santos, disaster coordinator, ranch owner, mother, grandmother, and most importantly, herself. They'd thought they were writing the ending to my story. But all they'd done was give me material for a much more interesting new chapter. 5 years have passed since my children tried to steal my life. 5 years since I stood up in that community meeting and declared that I wouldn't go quietly into anyone's version of my future. The ranch is thriving. The historical designation brought grant money for trail maintenance and preservation. The cabins for women in transition are occupied by 3 residents who've become like daughters to me. The nonprofit has helped dozens of families learn to navigate aging with dignity instead of fear. Sarah and Michael have become genuine partners in my life, rather than managers of it. They've learned to see my independence as something to be protected, rather than something to be worried about. They've taught their own children to respect their grandparents' autonomy, breaking a cycle that could have continued for generations. David remains estranged, still bitter, still convinced that he was the victim in this story. I've stopped hoping for his apology and started accepting that some people can't afford to admit they were wrong. His children visit me regularly, maintaining relationships despite their father's refusal to do so. Sometimes love has to skip a generation. Emma graduated with honors and moved back to our county, where she works as a social worker specializing in family conflict resolution. She says I inspired her career choice. She says watching me fight for myself taught her that advocacy is sometimes the deepest form of love. People ask me if I'm bitter about losing 3 years of relationship with my son, about the pain this conflict caused, about the betrayal that started it all. They want to know if the fight was worth it. Here's what I tell them. I'm 74 years old now. I wake up every morning in my own house, on my own land, making my own decisions about my own life. I'm healthy, active, and useful. I'm surrounded by people who respect my intelligence and value my contributions. I'm exactly who I've always been, just older and maybe a little wiser. My children thought they could decide when my useful life was over, when I'd become too inconvenient to respect, when they could treat me like a problem to be solved rather than a person to be loved. They were wrong, and proving them wrong, fighting for my right to remain myself, teaching them that aging doesn't equal incompetence. That wasn't just worth the fight. That was worth everything. Because at the end of the day, what's the point of a long life if you don't get to live it as yourself? What's the point of raising children if they're going to forget that you're still a person after you become their parent? What's the point of building something beautiful if you're going to hand it over to people who see it only as an asset to be liquidated? I didn't fight my children because I'm a stubborn old woman who can't accept help. I fought them because I'm a strong woman who knows the difference between help and control, between support and manipulation, between love and possession. They thought they knew what was best for me, but I knew what was best for me, remaining exactly who I've always been, for as long as I'm able to be her. And I'm not done being her yet, not by a long shot. My name is Maria Santos. I coordinate disasters, run a ranch, and refuse to be managed by anyone, including my own children. At 74, I'm still learning, still growing, still fighting for what matters. And what matters most is this: no one, not even the people who love you most, has the right to decide when your life stops being yours to live. Remember that. Fight for that. It's worth everything you have to give. Because in the end, the only person who gets to define the terms of your existence is you. And that's a right worth fighting for, no matter who's trying to take it away, even if they call it love.